Hello, everyone. Welcome to our next webinar session. Hopefully, you were able to engage in our previous session. It may still be ongoing. It was a great conversation between Dr. Blair and Dr. Hanna. So we have right now our financial aid session, and our presentation today will be handled by Jorge Olivares. He is assistant director, sorry, of the Office of Financial Aid. And I am going to do my best to share the presentation. I seem to have lost the slides though, so let me figure out why that happened. Jorge, would you like to formally introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you very much. As mentioned, my name is Jorge Olivares. I'm an assistant director here in the financial aid office, located in the Lakeshore campus. But you'll see me and my counterpart Michael at the Maywood campus from time to time. We're there Tuesdays through Thursdays from 9 a.m. until 4 p.m. Please feel free to come by. You can also feel free to reach us either through the SSOM email address as well, and that'll be at the end of this presentation. So that way you don't have to memorize that this second. Also, we'll offer the phone number that you can reach out to us if you have any questions. We will return your phone call as soon as we possibly can. Bear with us, and we'll address your concerns and questions as quickly and as proficiently as possible.
All right, thank you, Jorge. So just to give everyone an opportunity to understand how this will work, we'll be presenting a presentation for Jorge. We will also be providing you with the opportunity to utilize the Q&A feature, which you'll see at the bottom of the Zoom screen. You can place your questions in the Q&A chat. We will either submit those questions to Jorge for him to address. Like I said, I will try to cover anything related to merit aid, and then some will be addressed in the chat response as well. Okay, so without further ado.
Thank you very much, Daryl. So, your guide to financing your Loyola medical education, hosted by the medical team as well as myself. If we can go to the next one, which we'll go over the agenda today. We'll talk about cost of attendance, different components within the cost of attendance, paying for your medical school, the locus to-do lists, appeals, and other forms. And we'll finish up with reviewing a little bit of financial wellness, and of course, questions and answers that you may have at the end of the session. The first part that we'll speak about is going to be cost of attendance. When you're looking at your cost of attendance, there's a few different things that you want to look at. The first thing is going to be your direct costs. These are expenses that are going to essentially be on your account that we charge directly to the student through Locus typically. You'll see that the student health insurance is asterisk there because of the fact that not every student is going to use the university's health insurance. It is an option for the student if they would like to go ahead and use it, but at the same token, if you already have insurance, you can opt out of that. So it's an expense that we have in there that technically does get charged on your Locus account, but however, some students may opt out of that cost. There is a waiver to be filled out if you do want to waive out of or opt out of the insurance. You just have to make sure that you complete that by October 1st. After that October 1st date, the insurance charges are applied to all full-time students. So just be aware. You can find that extra insurance waiver online at our website, luc.edu. You can put in insurance waiver, and it'll take you to the insurance page that will have that waiver for you to submit. Can we get the next slide, please? All right, thank you very much. The indirect cost is the second component of your cost of attendance. When we put together a cost of attendance for every student, we put together indirect as well as direct costs. Here you'll see some examples of some of the indirect costs. These are expenses that the student incurs, typically outside of Locus. They're responsible for these charges depending on their specific circumstance. We do add components to the cost of attendance that we can take into consideration when we talk about the student's total eligibility for the year. We do add in housing and meals, books and supplies, and personal fees. We gather that amount with the indirect cost to come up with the student's cost of attendance, which could total $97,244. Now, this again could be subject to change depending on if the student does select to have the insurance through the university or not, and they opt out of it. So that could vary from one student to the next. And of course, will change from one year to the next as well, because your class schedule and tuition charges may vary as well. We can go on to the next slide. Regarding paying for medical school, there is a couple of different options when it comes to paying for medical school. Some of those are going to be your merit-based, your need-based scholarships that the university will look at and see if they can review that information. I'll talk a little bit more about need-based scholarships in a moment once we go through the list. Outside of scholarships, you'd have your federal unsubsidized loans, which at a graduate level is $20,500. But when you go into a professional degree, the Department of Education actually allows you to borrow a little bit more in unsubsidized loans. For any of the students who are coming out of either a master's program or a graduate program, you know that the max amount that you can borrow in a lifetime is 138,500. But at, excuse me, as a medical student, that amount can actually go up to 224,000. So that additional amount is to account for the fact Department of Education realizes that medical school is more expensive than your typical graduate or master's programs. So they do help out by allowing a student to borrow a little bit more. All of these loans would be under the category of unsubsidized loans. If you're coming from an undergraduate program, you may have been used to things like federal Pell Grants, subsidized loans, and unsubsidized loans. Once you get into a graduate level, unfortunately, all need-based federal aid goes away. That would be your federal Pell Grants, your subsidized loans. And unfortunately, all we have left with is the unsubsidized loans. And just as an FYI for everyone, an unsubsidized loan is a loan in which the student is being charged interest on the loan from the beginning of the loan to the last payment is made on the loan. So essentially, from the first time to the last time, you're being charged interest from the beginning of the loan. So just a little different than some of the types of loans that students may have been aware of in the past. Again, at this level, they change a little bit. The fourth option you'll see there is graduate plus loans. And the reason why this varies, as well as the private loan and the outside scholarships, is because these are not limited to your yearly limits or your lifetime limits. They are capped by the total cost of attendance per semester or per year in which you borrow. So that amount can vary depending on how much the student actually needs to borrow. That includes private loans as well. It varies, but the cap is always your cost of attendance budget for either the semester or for the year. There is also something very important to remember, that if we offer any loans, whatever classification it may be, they're only in the offered state. You would have to go in and accept them. So you're not obligated to use those loans, but they are there to help pay for your education and help pay for your investment. But again, you're under no obligation to use those loans at any point, and they are not a use it or lose it type of situation. As I mentioned before, you have a lifetime limit. If you don't use your yearly amount of loans, those remaining amounts will just go back to your lifetime limit for you to use in the future, or not use at all, depending on your specific circumstance. If we can please switch to the next slide. We're going to go over next the locus to-do list, appeals and forms. Every student may have a different situation going on when it comes to their FAFSA information. And from time to time, the Department of Education will request that we in the financial aid office confirm certain information. This can be anything from a student completing a statement of educational purpose, which just confirms their identity. or a confirming their U.S. citizenship. For example, if the FAFSA was not able to confirm the person's U.S. citizenship with the Homeland Security or Social Security Administration, they may ask that the university that they're going to attend to collect some information. It's very important that whatever to-do list that you have on your file, you complete it in full. If you have any questions, please reach out to the financial aid office. We'll be happy to help you out wherever we can. But we don't want to ignore these to-do lists. It's very important that you get in, if you haven't already, get into the habit of checking your accounts on a daily, weekly basis, just so you make sure you're on top of everything. We in the financial aid office are notorious for only communicating to you in your student email. Through Loyola, we typically will not communicate any other which way, because of the sensitivity of some of the information that we have to share with you guys. We will only communicate through the email that we know is solely owned by you, which would be our email that we gave to you. So just as a heads up, please get into the habit of checking your emails on a regular basis. And again, completing any to-do list items that might appear on your account, as this may delay your financial aid process. So a lot of times we'll get questions of what is the delay, and a lot of times it will be to-do list items that still need to be attended to. So please check that on a regular basis. If we can go on to the next slide, which will cover forms and appeals and forms, excuse me. There are some circumstances in which we will ask, or a student will ask for special consideration, specifically towards budgets. We do take some items into account with the cost of attendance budget that are estimates. There are times where the student may get charged more or have to pay for some expenses that are not budgeted. We do have a process which will allow a student to submit information to us so we can see if we can add any additional components to the student's budget. We won't be able to cover every single thing, but there is a list on the 2025-26 budget appeal that reviews that information so that a student can see what might apply and what amounts might apply up to. And then if approved, we can add that additional amount to the student's budget. This typically just means that the student is going to have more room in their budget to borrow. This doesn't increase scholarships. This is really just to increase the amount a student can essentially borrow for the year. There are other types of forms that students might need to apply or complete. For example, the U.S. citizenship forms are located on our website under forms. That you can find and complete those. What's really important with any of these documents is that you complete it and then submit it either in person or through secure upload through Locus, so that way we make sure that we track it under the correct student. That information, we would then receive it and then process the information as soon as we can, typically within about a 7 to 10 business day time frame. Usually a lot quicker, but in the same token, it can't take about that long. If we can move on to the next slide. Kind of went over this information in terms of finding the forms. You can find it on our website. You can do a search for 2025-26 forms. And for the most part, all that information is there for you. There is one form that does come up a lot, and it's called a consent form. In 2024-25, the Department of Education made it mandatory that if the school is going to share any sensitive information with any third-party organizations regarding scholarships or grants, we have to get consent from the student before we can do that. That form is located within the financial aid office. We don't make it public, so you do have to reach out to us to complete that form, just so that we have consent to be able to share any of your sensitive information with anybody else. That's a big mandate from the Department of Education moving forward, is that we don't share any sensitive information with anybody else besides who you give us permission to, you, the student. So please make sure that if you do need to fill out an application or have us fill out an application, just contact us so that we can send you over the consent form, and that'll help you out through the process. And let's financial wellness. Let's go with financial wellness. We in the office do have a couple of different plans that we can help a student through to figure out what they can or cannot budget and what their budgets can look for. We do recommend that when you are going through this process, you start working on a budget in terms of what you can and cannot afford. So that way you have a better idea of the different expenses that you might have to incur throughout your first year, second year, third year, and fourth year and on. It is important that if you have any questions, feel free to give us a call. We will be happy to sit down and talk to you about your budget. Budgets always can be a little bit subjective because one person's expenses may be wildly different from another person's expenses, as well as the income coming in. But we can sit down and kind of talk about how to figure out a budget for the students so that they get a better idea of what expenses they may have to incur, and kind of lay that out for them. This sometimes is the first time a student has done this, so it's a great resource for anybody that's new to school to kind of get a better idea of what's happening with their finances, and we'd be happy to sit down and speak with the student and help them put together a financial plan for themselves. Thank you. So lastly, I kind of blew through this, so I apologize. I'll give a lot of time for questions. But if you do need to contact us for whatever reason, feel free to give us a call at 773-508-7704 or email us at ssomfineaid@luc.edu. So ssomfineaid@luc.edu. We'll be happy to answer any questions that you may have. I have two mottos in my life. First one is there's no such thing as a stupid question, just stupid reasons not to ask questions. Please ask questions. And typically there's a million reasons to ask a question. Only one reason why you did it, and usually revolves around you not wanting to. Please always feel free to ask a question. We're always happy to hear to help you out wherever we can. With that being said, I believe Daryl will open up to some questions. I know we have a couple of questions in the Q&A panel. I'm sorry, you're still muted.
Yeah, I see. I see. All right. So let's get started with the Q&A. Thank you for the overview. We had some questions prepared in advance, but I see that we have questions here. And again, I think they're probably more pressing because of the timing. So let me get started. And again, we'll share the responses. The first question here, is it too late for incoming students to apply for merit awards? If so, can we apply next year for the remaining years? So merit-based awards, as we described in our interview day close, these are resources that are utilized by admissions. They are offered to incoming students, and they are portioned over their 4-year experience. So there's nothing that we can really do to provide that resource in future years beyond the first year. When you were accepted into the program, you were given an opportunity through a link in your accept letter to let us know about your need or your interest in a merit-based award. We actually received over 175 of these requests. And I can tell you this, I've been administering merit-based awards here at Stritch since 2016, and the most number of awards we've ever dispersed has been around 60 total. And again, the award sizes vary. So it's really not going to be reasonable to consider a merit-based award for 150 or even 170 students. One of the things that we do is we disperse the award once the candidate has committed, once the candidate has enrolled. And again, it's dispersed over each year that they are in program under satisfactory academic progress. If you are requesting that award and it has not been awarded, then what you need to know is that you're still being considered. We have candidates who received merit-based awards. In some cases, they'll hold them through matriculation. In some cases, they may decide that they are going to withdraw. And if so, then the award is recovered. And if it's recovered, then we redisperse it. So this is a little bit different than what other programs might be doing, which is, let's say they have, $500,000 in merit scholarships to award, and they award 1,500,000 to gain the 500,000, right? Because they anticipate that students will melt. Well, we don't really anticipate that, and we are not in a position to over award. So we're very careful about how we dispense that. So again, if you've already made your request through the mechanisms you've been provided, then we have that information and we're still considering it. I've had a handful of candidates over the past few days send me emails, which I will eventually respond to. It's been a busy week. Sorry, I can't respond to every email instantly, but these requests are considering other awards that they've received. So, for example, if we provided a candidate with an award, or in some cases haven't provided them with a merit-based award, I'm getting emails telling me, I got this award from MCW, 40,000 a year. What do you think about that? Well, honest opinion, what I think about that is that's a great award. And if that is your primary concern upon entering medical school is the cost, then you have to consider it. What I will also tell you is that over the long run, is probably the least important thing to consider when you're thinking about medical training. Okay. And there's lots of compelling reasons for that. Obviously, the training program itself, what happens through residency or in the match process and where you end up with your first job, and obviously the type of training that you have. So again, if the primary consideration at this point for you is cost, then you have to be more discerning. Uh, I appreciate you telling me that you have a matching offer, but there's nothing I can do about that unless we recover funds and we can redistribute them. And there are, opportunities for that. But again, if you're talking about percentage odds, I think the percentage odds are greater for you if you have an award and you have an absolute certainty that that award has been discerned as important enough to consider so that you can afford medical school, then you really have to go with that instinct. All right, so I'll continue on. I know that's an important question. Jorge, I think this one's going to be for you. What is the difference between a federal unsubsidized loan and an unsubsidized loan with HEA denotation?
With the HEA,
Yes.
I'd have to look into that. I'm not exactly sure. I have some more follow-up questions regarding where they're seeing that designation.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not sure I'm familiar with that
Is
either.
that in the chat or the question and
Yes,
answer?
that's from an anonymous attendee. We have a lot of anonymous attendees asking questions for financial aid. So
So
there's opportunity to type an answer there, so we can maybe if you want to research that, we can maybe do that
yeah,
offline.
I can. The answer is really going to be dependent on where they are seeing the actual loan type.
Mhm.
Because there are some different loan types that may have existed in the past that people have applied for that still show up. It may have been moved over, so it really depends on where it was that they saw that designation. If they saw that in their dashboard in studentaid.gov, then it could just be a naming standard that they use for that specific loan. Um, in terms of the differences of how the loans work or are paid back, there really hasn't been any difference in the loans in about the last 20 years. There used to be other loans that the Department of Education used to use, depending on where it was that you got it, from what school you may have gotten them. But it's been a few decades since they've used those classifications. And pretty much, if you're getting any loan from a university in the last, I'll go, let's just say 4 years, right? Because that'll be at least a 4-year undergraduate program. you would have the loan type would have essentially all been the same. It would not change, and it would be dealt with and handled in the same manner. It really won't change. So again, it really depends on where it is that the student is seeing that classification. There is,
If I can interject, it looks like the same or another anonymous attendee has asked or responded, um, indicating that this is a designation for someone pursuing medical education. So what I might anticipate with that response is that uh, I don't know if you're old enough to know what a heel override is, Jorge, but heel
yeah,
override is what created this, as you mentioned earlier,
the additional amount.
consideration for the additional amount to borrow.
Yeah,
And that was under the Clinton administration. Yes, I'm old, back in the 90s. So
yeah,
the heel override actually increased the umbrella of borrowing for medical students. So if you're seeing HEA, it could be a consideration for that, which is still part of the landscape of federal aid administration. So I guess that
they
makes
they
sense.
have to label it differently, and they do this for other loans as well, where they'll label them differently, just
Yeah.
so that when other schools see them, they know where that amount comes from.
Right.
Because if you're in a regular I'm sorry, a regular master's profession, graduate program, excuse me, the max you could get would be 20,500.
Right.
So their system doesn't pick up the additional loans unless they're class or notated in a certain way. But
Right.
the punchline is still the same in that the loans are handled the exact same way, repayment is handled the same way. It's just a naming classification that they really using just to distinguish what the two are. But at the end of the
Right.
day, interest rate is the same, the repayment is the same, the way they handle them is the same, and collections are going to be the same on it as well.
But as you stated before, let's say that this person is enrolled in a master's program and then they enroll into medical school and they have a portfolio of loans that include master's program or medical school, or even more to the point, you're in a medical school program and you decide to do a master's program. Now your borrowing changes based on that,
Yeah, yeah,
right?
and that's how they tell. Because
Hmm.
you could go from, you finish up your medical degree, but then you decide, you know what, I want to go back to school because I want to get an MBA for whatever reason. Well, then all of a sudden the amount you can borrow in your lifetime is going to change. You're going to go from being able to borrow 224,000, and then it's going to go back down to 138,000. Same thing would be as if you finish off your medical degree and you decide that you want to go back and get a bachelor's degree. What's going to go from that 224,000 down to 57,500. And the way they distinguish, as Daryl was mentioning, which loans are which and where they should go and how to count them properly is depending on how they're designated on the list of loans for the student.
Right. And I would imagine if you're looking at NLDS, that might be where you're seeing these designations of loans.
Used to be NSLDS, but now they moved all the information over to studentaid.gov, and
Okay,
they'll list the loans there for the student, and they'll have the exact same names that we see on NSLDS.
got it.
So yeah, it gets a little confusing.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Awesome. Another question for you, Jorge. Please specify the deadline for when we need to verify citizenship status, either in person or remotely through notary services. I've yet to get a specific date for this.
There's really not a hard deadline other than I would say about a week before the end of the semester. Technically, the last day where we can do anything will be your last day of the semester with anything federal. Um, we have to be able to not only clear up whatever the to-do list item is, but then also originate any loans that may be pending. And just as an FYI, when we say origination, we just send it for processing from the Department of Education. But we need time to do that to send the loans over or plus loans or regulars unsubsidized loans over so that they get processed in enough time by the government so they pick it up before your last day of classes or the last day of the semester. So technically the answer is that last day of the semester. However, I would not wait that long because that's just for that one process. If we need to get past that process, do a number of other steps in front of it, we need time to be able to do that. So usually I'll tell students about a week before the end of your semester, the very longest. However, I will stipulate that during that time, if you don't resolve it all the way up until then you are we are gonna continue to make collection efforts on your account. You may get hit with a late fee during that time. So to to set yourself up in a better situation, the best thing to do is to get it done as soon as you possibly can. Because then that way you know ahead of time what your aid is going to look like, and if you're going to have to pay anything out of pocket. No student has to have financial aid to go to school, regardless of wherever that school is. That's why the loans are only offered. But then the question is okay, well, then how do you want to pay for school? And while you until you tell us what it is that you want to do, we'll make collection efforts, and that may result in late fees. So the honest answer is try to get it done as soon as you possibly can. The technical answer is you technically have until the last day of your semester. However, I would not wait that long, and I would do it way before that. But that's true when it comes to loans, any to-do list items that are federally mandated or that we need to figure out for financial aid. We want to get those in as soon as possible. But again, a student technically can start classes and not have financial aid in place. But the question then comes up, how do you want to pay for class? Because the bills are due on a specific date, either the balance due in full, you have a payment plan in place, or you have financial aid in place. One of those three things have to happen so that you avoid any kind of late fees past the due date. So
All right.
I hope that answered your question.
Well done. Thank you. So I'm going to combine a couple questions here, and this
Sure.
really is more germane to the outside scholarship effect of how that affects your, packaging. So we have a question about the HPSP military scholarship. I'm sure someone out there has a National Health Service scholarship consideration, or probably other outside scholarships. Actually, a question about where do we find outside scholarships? So can you maybe explain on both ends of that question?
Sure.
Like
Sure.
how it affects the packaging of loans, and then what resources you might provide for help in looking for outside scholarships.
Sure. First, really quick, in terms of resources, we do have an external scholarship page on our website that goes over a list of different scholarships that you can apply for. We do always recommend that when you are applying for scholarships, you want to do your research before you do to make sure that whatever organization that you're going to apply for will work with us. It's not usually that we won't accept their money. I will be very frank, we'll take money from anywhere. We don't really distinguish that. The issue that typically comes up is if that specific organization will actually send the money to us, the school. So you do want to make sure that we are on what they call a vendor list. I don't know why they call it a vendor list, but they call it a vendor list, just to make sure that they will actually send the funds over to us. I also always recommend that students actually look locally, look at your neighborhood, your township, your county, your city, your state, and then build your way up from there. I like to mention the VFW a lot because you'll be very surprised how often they have small scholarships. And like I always tell students, $1,000 scholarships add up to 1,000, $10,000 scholarships add up to 10,000. Those little drops can really fill up your cup really quick. So it is worth taking a look on there. And of course, searching in Google is always a good resource as well. But with that, I also do offer a couple of tips. Number one, you should never have to pay for a scholarship. It just doesn't make sense to pay somebody for free money. I shouldn't have to give my credit card information to get free money. That just seems incredibly suspicious. And when you are looking out there, be aware that some of those scholarship applications that you'll run across online are going to be telemarketing ploys. They're just going to be tools used for schools to approach a larger student population. I'm sure we've all seen those advertisements on social media. If you make X amount of money, we can help you out with this much money. And then you call, and then next thing you know, you get a phone call from Jorge from Loyola saying, hey, we got great opportunities for you here. So doing a little bit of research is really going to go a far way for you to figure out what's going to work out best for you, and it will cover. I will say this, you always want to make sure that you look at a difference between full tuition and then full ride, because they're two very different things. My apologies, my phone is ringing. My apologies. They're two very different things. Full tuition, exactly what it means, right up to tuition. Full ride means everything. So when you're looking at those scholarships, you want to see what they will cover, what the aid will go to. And this will segue me into limitations when it comes into financial aid. As I mentioned before, I spoke about cost of attendance budgets. This is a budget that our department, the financial aid department, puts together for every single student for the year or the semester, which one they're attending. And the government essentially says that the school can come up with whatever number they want to come up with. The only thing is that the school can never give students aid more than that number. Okay. So I'm going to just use some real simple numbers. Let's say that my cost of attendance for, University A is $10,000. And while I get accepted, they offer me a $5,000 scholarship, and I happen to be eligible to receive $5,000 worth of loans, a total of $10,000, which is the exact same amount as my cost of attendance budget. I'm okay to get the $5,000 scholarship and the $5,000 loans because I'm within that budget amount. However, let's say I end up getting a $2,000 scholarship from an outside organization, um, Rich Uncles USA, let's say. They give me a $2,000 scholarship. I then present it to the school. The school says, great, we'll go ahead and put this on your award. However, because you are at your limit for your cost of attendance budget, I have to return some money. And what I'm going to return is going to be the worst of all of your aid, which in this case is going to be interest-bearing aid. So the $2,000 scholarship gets replaces $2,000 worth of my loans. So now instead of borrowing $5,000, I only borrow $3,000, and I got $7,000 worth of scholarships. That minimizes the amount of debt that I get myself into because that loan money had to go back. And again, by the Department of Education's guidelines, that money had to go back, but it got replaced with what we would call gift money, money that as long as I do what I need to do, I don't have to pay back. So that's how getting outside scholarships can affect your overall aid. We can have you awarded up to your cost of attendance budget. And if we get some gift money that comes in, we're going to replace that gift money with some of that loan money that you had, get rid of that, and then kind of washes itself out. So from time to time, students who are awarded up to cost of attendance or get a lot of scholarships, you may notice that we have to return some of your funds back at some point. We'll start with the worst and work our way down to the best till we just leave you with nothing but the best in the cup. Sometimes that means we have to return your PLUS loans, your private loans, or even your unsubsidized loans. And a lot of students see this and they're under the impression that we're stealing their money is what we get sometimes. That's not what's happening. We're not making decisions for the student. It's federal guidelines. We have to return that funds based on those guidelines. So you might see a letter from us from time to time that we had to return some loans. But if you got a scholarship right beforehand, it's 99% of the time it's because of that scholarship in which we had to send some money back. I hope that answers your question, and I hope that makes sense as well.
So this is a question I'm extrapolating from previously administered questions here, but I think the sentiment is, a lot of stress on the Department of Education. They're the entity that provides the resource for federal aid. Now, what happens if they're not doing that, or if there's some, reciprocal action that is like forestalling that, or, there's another, pause in the distribution or disbursement, which is going to cause everyone to lose their minds. You have the other remedy of a private loan. Okay. And let's start thinking about whether or not the private loan industry starts to see this as an opportunity, and now they shift their rates. So now their rates are at 4%, right? So now they're reasonable in that regard. So
Yeah.
can you help explain to the people on the call here, like, again, assuming things are the same within the structure of the federal aid program, like what protections would be helpful to have for students in this particular bind where they're thinking perhaps maybe a private loan might be a better option?
Well, I think one of the first things we have to remember is that the Department of Education right now has not announced that they're going to make any changes to awarding, to amounts that are being offered, to loans that are being dispersed, to federal Pell Grants. So as of right now, the Department of Education has very much been, and the things are going to keep going the way they have been in the past. To be quite frank, the every administration can change the way that the Department of Education um, not fundamentally works, but sometimes disperses those funds. So the changes that have been coming around, although they can be very frightening, at the same token, they're not very different than stuff that can happen at any other point. Um, that's not to say that there cannot be delays, but again, to be frank with you, there was delays last year, and there was a different administration. So the delays with the Department of Education can happen for a multitude of reasons, besides the fact of the current administration's new processes or new decisions. They can change from one year to the next. But as it stands now, the Department of Education has stand that they're going to continue on with things. There might be delays with disbursements. They have not announced this, but this is just something that we've talked in the industry that there might be delays from here and from different things that they're changing around. But as far as we're under the opinion that the process is going to continue on as it is. However, whenever a student does apply for even a graduate plus loan, even if it wasn't under this current administration, we would always advise you to shop around for private loans as well, because the interest rates could vary. If you look at the interest rates from last year, they were around 9%. And if you're driven by any bank lately, a lot of times they're advertising 7% or less. So it's worth it to students to shop around if they're going to consider any kind of plus loans or anything like that, to shop around and see what's in your best interest, and also hedge that bet that if something happens, it's not going to interfere with that big portion of the loans that that you've applied for. That's one way to kind of hedge your bet against those issues with the Department of Education. Um, Interest rates for the subsidized, unsubsidized plus loans, they change from one year to the next. So there's nothing to say that next year they won't go down or go up. Um, Historically, they've gone on a down trail up until last year where they did go up. But at the same token, that's just an example of it can change from one year to the next. So you can definitely hedge your bet if you're really, really concerned about what's happening with the Department of Education and you want to avoid those issues. You definitely can just go ahead and apply for a private loan that may work out in your best interest in the long run. Sometimes students will try to borrow on enough for the full year or make payments for the full year. A lot of times we'll tell them like, you may just want to consider just a semester at a time, just so that way you get that. Now, I'm not saying your whole balance for this university. I'm talking about financial aid loans and things like that. You can technically take out loans one semester at a time. Sometimes people will do that because interest rates can change from time to time, but also their particular circumstance can change from one moment to the next. Where one semester, their rich uncle comes in and is like, "I'll take care of it this semester," and then next semester, they have to handle it themselves. So playing around with that sometimes can help you feel a little bit more secure. And I mentioned the fact that things are very fluidic in financial aid from one year to the next, just as reassurance that this is nothing different than what happens in any other year when it comes to financial aid. It's just always fluid and it can change from one year to the next. And we in the financial aid office are very accustomed to it, and we'll roll with it and try to help out students as much as we possibly can to kind of work through those things. If you ever have a question or concern, please don't wait till it's too late to talk to us about it. Come and talk to us, because at that point we have more options and more suggestions to give you than I only have one. So definitely reach out to us and we'll be happy to answer any questions you might have.
So I'm seeing a few questions here that demonstrate a disparity in what current incoming students might see. So in some cases, they're kind of confused about what locus is. I actually typed it into the chat, or not into the chat, for a response to one of the questions, but locus is actually an acronym. It stands for Loyola's Online Connection to University Services. And this is like a portal that allows you to access financial aid and registrar and bursar. So it is a platform used by the institution. This is where you'll see your financial aid, packaged financial aid resources listed. If you've been packaged, you can see the awards, you can accept them, you can decline them, whatever the case may be. So there seems to be a disparity among the group. Some people have not seen a package yet. Some people have not gained access to Locus, apparently. We've got one candidate here who sees a packaging platform or an array of packaging, 3 loans and a scholarship. They're wondering, is this scholarship a grant? Where did it come from? So in the instance that a candidate is not able to access this information, what remedy do you have? And in the instance that someone is trying to sort through the information they see, maybe how can you help them with that?
Sure. Um, so I think most people, when they first start off understanding their financial reward package, is very challenging, because the financial aid package just goes over financial aid. It doesn't talk about expenses. And that's when a lot of students and parents need to pull out the calculator and kind of do the math a little bit. But since they're not presented in the same format together, it gets a little confusing in terms of what's going to cover and what's not going to cover and things like that. And there's also a difference between what you borrow and what's dispersed to your account, which I'll talk about in a second as well. Understanding the information really, whenever there's a loan, until you accept it and you go and accept it, remember it's only offered. So we will take it into account when we're looking at the balance and things like that. But at the same token, if you tell us that you don't want to use the loans, then we won't discuss that. We'll leave that out of it. Um, we usually tip, it depends on how it's kind of been packaged, but typically you'll see scholarships first and then loans come in second, because we try to use those scholarships first when it comes to the hierarchy of awarding. Because again, they're considered what we would call gift money, money that is, again, you, as long as you do what you need to do, you don't have to pay back. Sometimes in the way that's listed, it might jump a little bit, especially if, when it comes to the financial aid award letters that are actually mailed to some students, the order in which it appears is a little bit different. But for our purposes, typically we would go ahead and apply the scholarships first to your tuition and charges. And then from there, see about adding in any kind of loan funds. When you are adding in the loans, you do want to take into account something called origination fees. These are fees that the government charges on the loans. It's just not, they don't just put the amount that they charge you on top of what you borrow, they take it out of what you borrow. So if I borrow $1, where it really hits my account is about 95 cents. It's roughly about 5% when it comes to plus loans and 2% when it comes to unsubsidized loans. So that's why sometimes you'll see a little bit of a difference between what is borrowed and then what's dispersed. And then also on the financial aid package, sometimes they'll break it down per semester. So you'll see unsubsidized loan, let's say 20,500, fall is 10,250, and then spring is 2,250. When you add those two together, comes out to your grand total of 20,500. Same thing with the additional loan amount, as we were talking about before. The 20,500 is the max amount that any graduate or master's student can receive. But as a medical student, you're eligible for an additional amount of 22,222. Excuse me, I just want to make sure I got that number correct. That will show up as a second line item on the award. Again, you can select which one you want to use if you don't want to use them both, or any portion of the amount that you want to use. Um, but again, you want to make sure that you just subtract that 2% from the unsubsidized. And if you're borrowing plus loans, that sometimes will appear on there as well. That would be a line item under your two amounts of your unsubsidized loans. That one, they charge a 5%. Once you subtract that, that'll give you the amounts that'll be dispersed. But that's kind of how to tell the differences in amounts in terms of that. But I always keep in mind that those amounts that are listed under the financial aid tab aren't reflecting your balance. They're just talking about the aid that's coming in. That sometimes gets a little confusing for students because they look at that and then some of the remaining balance too, they get thrown off a little bit by. Um, right now, at least, most of your remaining balance may be an estimate because it may include, like I said, that medical insurance that you may or may not actually use. So it is at this point kind of considered an estimate. I hope I answered that question kind of clearly.
So, I mean, some of these questions are, I mean, again, that was a multi-question question. So I think you're doing great. Some of these questions that I'm getting now, I mean, there's a tinge of personal discernment here. So I'm trying to make these as generalized as possible. Here's a question that just came in. Will the government or private companies continue to give us loans throughout our medical education, even if we can't start paying it off until after we graduate? So this is a good question in terms of like, how do students take these loans into residency? I know that you focus mostly on, graduate student, loans and processing, but for medical students, there's typically a goal for students to consolidate their loans at the end of their program so they can go into this consolidation process, which puts them into IRB, right? Income-based repayments or whatever. So is there a remedy or a process that you might be able to explain to medical students to help them understand like how they handle their loans going into residency?
Sure. So the big thing when it comes to any of the federal backed loans, like unsubsidized loans, is the Department of Education essentially says that while you're in school, you don't have to pay back on the loans. And they give you until 6 months after you graduate, withdraw, or you fall below part-time to start paying back on the loans. Um, Depending on how everything is kind of tracked, you can um, you can request, like for example, with plus loans, you can request plus loans to mimic your unsubsidized loans so that again, while you're in school, you're not having to make payments and you can wait until after you graduate before you start making those payments. Those plus loans can also be rolled into your consolidation, which is also the other good thing about consolidation is that, as I mentioned before, each year you might get charged different interest. When you consolidate, it pretty much brings all your interest rates into just one solid interest rate instead of having multiple different interest rates. For example, right now, if you borrowed plus loans in 2025, 2024, 25, they had a 9% interest rate. Well, if you borrowed a few years before, your interest rate may have only been 4%. So consolidating allows you to kind of put a medium in terms of the interest rate. So that way it's just one rate versus fluctuating between each one. The private loans are a little bit different because it really depends on the lender in terms of when they want the loans to be paid back. From my experience, a lot of them are pretty immediate, but there are some that do make exceptions and are willing to kind of work with students in terms of when the repayment actually has to happen. But again, that's a conversation I have with each individual lender because each one's a little bit different. But
The process of consolidating does allow, again, to offer you a little bit more time in terms of repaying back the loans and things like that. And also base it on your income that you submit to them and apply. Um, in terms of, because I know the question was, will the government and private loans continue to give us loans throughout the medical education if we can't start paying them back? Technically, in terms of the government loans, yes, because when it comes to the 20,500 and an additional $22,222, that is really based on if you can do a FAFSA or not. It's not based on credit or anything like that. Your plus loans and your private loans, those may be based and are based on your credit, but the other set of loans are not. Essentially, if you're able to do a FAFSA and is accepted, at the very least, you'll be offered unsubsidized loans. And that's means that regardless, as long as the Department of Education is offering loans, you'll still be eligible for that, and your loan period should carry over. Fundamentally, the Department of Education would have to change a lot of things for that to change, as that's been a mandate since the very beginning of the loan process since the 80s, early 80s. So that wouldn't change. And again, with a private lender, it really, again, just really depends on the lender in terms of what they will or will not do when it comes to collections. I hope that answered your question.
So we have just 4 minutes left, but I think there's a really important question. I don't know if we've addressed it or not, but the student refund. All right. So talk a little bit about like what is the typical refund for a student that's fully packaged, and what is your kind of recommendation for how to use a refund as a living resource, but not to go over that resource so you end up in trouble?
Yeah, I would say that the first thing you always have to remember is when a student gets refunds, these are typically coming from your loans with interest. So this is something that you're going to have to pay back. It's in debt that you're going to incur. With that in mind, you definitely want to try to use those funds for your actual education expenses versus other things. Because one of the things you're going to notice is that educational expenses during this time is going to be your 90% of your expenses in life because it is very expensive. So we do recommend that whenever possible, you hold on to your refunds as long as you possibly can and use them for any expenses that might pop up for you later on. For example, testing that might pop up that you have to pay, special books that you might need to purchase for a specific book. Um, but it is in the best interest of the student to hold on to the refunds as long as they possibly can to extend it, because your refunds will be dispersed to you only once per semester. So if that amount you need for the full 4.5 month semester long period, then you're going to really have to stretch out those funds to make sure that it's applied for each month's expenses. So it's really going to be to your best interest to now really learn how to budget and stick to that budget so that whatever that refund amount that you get will actually extend. We've changed our process a little bit in terms of budgeting so that we can offer as much refunds as we can to students to extend out as much as they can, but it's limited. As I mentioned before, you have lifetime limits, you have yearly limits, and you have your COA or cost of attendance limits as well. If you do find that you have some additional expenses, you may want to consider the budget appeal because again, that can increase a little bit of that loan money for yourself. But again, you know, learning to budget yourself. As I mentioned before, you guys can come into the medical office, financial aid office, and we can go ahead and help you figure out what a budget might look for you. Um, uh, so, depending on what you end up actually borrowing in total will dictate how much of a refund you end up getting. So a lot of students beforehand will put together a budget and kind of know what they need to borrow for expenses direct and indirect, and only borrow just that amount. Um, so that they make sure that they budget themselves out throughout the whole throughout their whole semester or whole year. And again, feel free to come in and we can sit down and kind of work through a budget. And I would just recommend that you bring in your financial information so that way when we do talk about it, we're going to be more specific about your situation than just going over some generalities.
Well, that is, it's time. You did a great job, Jorge. There were a lot of questions here. There were some that were left unanswered, but again, I think they're more specific to individuals. There were a couple of requests for just getting that budget meeting started with you. So we're going to send these slides to everyone who participated today. We'll just give us until, the end of tomorrow to try to get all these slides together, and then we'll uh, obviously be able to address any questions you have moving forward, and the financial aid office will have their contact information available, and you can set up your visits with them. If you do have questions about Merit Aid, feel free to email us. Again, this is a resource that is limited, and we do our best to distribute it using reasonability in terms of not over rewarding. So if you haven't received a merit scholarship but have provided your insights as to why you should be awarded, then we have that information. And we appreciate the opportunity to consider you when we start seeing that resource come back and we can redistribute it. So any final words?
I do want to just, because I know a lot of people were kind of asking in terms of when will we get our financial aid package. I do believe that us, the financial aid department as a whole, has been working on them yesterday and today. So I would say within about the next 24 to 48 hours, you should see something as long as you've been have applied and gone through certain stages and you don't have any to-do list items on your account, then you should be getting something relatively soon regarding your package. It will if you were awarded any scholarships, it would include that as well. And not to throw Daryl under the bus, but I would say that if you haven't received anything or you have questions, you might want to reach out to Student Affairs to kind of see where you're at with that status.
All right. Thank you so much, Jorge.
Thank you very much, everyone. Best.
Appreciate it. All right. Thank you, everyone, for being a part of this webinar. We will see you hopefully tomorrow. We do have a fellowship event tonight on campus in the Alumni Center. If you RSVP for that, feel free to show up anytime before 5. And then tomorrow's activities will begin at 8:30. We look forward to seeing you here on campus. Take care, everyone. Safe travels, and we'll hope to see you soon. Thank you.